Are Europeans at a big disadvantage against judo or wrestlers from the US and Dagestan? Well, that is a really
You go
interesting
first.
question. Yeah, I guess we need to kind of break it down a little bit as to how you might perceive the Europeans to be at a disadvantage. And it specifically says judo and wrestling, but I'll be honest, I don't really see the style as being a factor in this, because when you look at those two locations, the US and the Dagestan, two very different locations. US is a gigantic country of 300 million people or so, and Dagestan is a tiny federal republic of Russia. It is basically, in effect, is a state within Russia. And Dagestan is known as being the home of the best grapplers and fighters in Russia as a whole. Of course, they're fighters from all over the country, but they do produce the more Olympic gold medalists per capita than anywhere else in Russia. And they definitely have the best MMA fighters, the best judo practitioners, the best wrestlers. They all come from this tiny, tiny region. And a big part of that is just it's cultural. These guys are they're training to fight from a very, very early age. And Dagestan is not a particularly rich province. It's very small. It's very mountainous outside of the main city. It is not a particularly high quality of life. You've just got lots and lots of tiny mountain villages dotted around, and there's not a lot else to do. And I think just part of the culture there is that kids don't grow up playing soccer. They grow up wrestling and fighting. And it's a very hard, very martial, very macho culture as well, where men are expected to fight. There's a lot of there's a lot of factors, a lot of questions about honor and respect, and the moment that somebody is perceived to be disrespected, or if there's any kind of feud between families or between people in the same village, then it's settled with a scrap. So there's a reason why Dagestan is producing so many amazing fighters and amazing competitors, because they will obviously come through that, not just a system, but just that entire culture. And that is where they're funneled. They're funneled into athletic success as a result. Or they just become hard people up to no good. With the Americans, and it's very different because, there is the scholastic system, and kids are put into wrestling very young in certain parts in the States. It's not nationwide. There are pockets of wrestling across the country where kids will start 3-4 years of age, and then there are other parts of the country where kids won't start wrestling until they're in sort of middle school, sort of 12, 13 years of age. But definitely it's an advantage. If you start any kind of grappling style, whether it is judo or wrestling, at an early age, and then you switch to jiu-jitsu and grappling slightly later, sort of maybe say around 15, 16, 18, it can be an incredible base, and it can definitely accelerate your development and your progress if you then go on to become a competitor. Are Europeans at a big disadvantage? Well, again, Europe is in a very large and diverse area. We're talking about a continent. So, not all European countries are the same, because every European country has a different level of jiu-jitsu and grappling. But I don't feel that we're at a huge disadvantage, because ultimately what it comes down to is the level of technique. And the level of technique is, jiu-jitsu is very democratic nowadays, because there's no barrier to entry anymore. All the information is out there. You can find good jiu-jitsu anywhere you go. It's a case of that, it used to be that the best technique was almost guarded and hidden and not shared. That's just not a worry anymore. You can go online, you can find anything that you need to know, and everybody's got access to the internet. So wherever you are, you can get good jiu-jitsu. What it really comes down to is, do you have the human resources? Do you have the training partners necessary to create a strong team? And there are many, many places in Europe that have really healthy communities of grapplers and really high-level training partners. Obviously, the UK, Poland, France, and there are a number of other countries that are coming through with really solid grapplers as well. We're seeing guys coming out of places like Spain, which never historically was a high level grappling country. Ireland is very, very strong for the size of the nation and for the amount of population. The Irish grapplers are very, very good. I've
Yeah,
met a
really
number of
good.
them personally. Yeah, we've seen them in action, and their jiu-jitsu is very, very good. The Scandinavian countries were actually ahead of the curve in Europe for
Yep.
many years. Like, those guys got onto jiu-jitsu in the late 90s, early 2000s, and for a very long time, those guys were, among the sort of the best grapplers in the continent. There are still some great examples, but less so, just because they don't have the big populations. And we're seeing it everywhere. It really doesn't matter whether it is Eastern Europe, whether we're talking about former Yugoslavian countries, whether we're talking about Eastern Europe. There's some great guys coming out of places like Hungary and places like that. So there's some really, really tough guys everywhere you go. Are they at a big disadvantage? I think the only disadvantage that they have compared to US and places like Dagestan is maybe they haven't competed as long at as high a level. That's the big issue, because these guys from the US and from places like Dagestan are just competing so much, so often, that by the time they arrive to sort of the pro ranks, they have a lot of experience, and they are
Mm.
good competitors. Whereas a lot of the Europeans are good jiu-jitsu practitioners, but they don't have that same time in the spotlight and the same experience competing in high pressure events. And that, I think, is the only thing that they really, really need to catch up on. But yeah, in terms of
Mm.
across the board, I don't see a great difference. We see good Europeans beating good Americans, beating Brazilians, beating guys from Dagestan. So, long answer,
Yeah.
I'm afraid, but yeah, I don't see a
No, it was
huge disadvantage.
interesting. I agree. I'm always fascinated by kind of nation versus nation, and it's sort of a nation's character against another nation's character. I think it's like a kind of legacy from how like Pride used to promote their matches. It was Fedor, the cold-blooded Russian killer, versus the like fiery, passionate Brazilian or the stoic Japanese. Like I really like all those little um, kind of generalizations. Yeah, yeah, but everything else is just like you said. Yeah, yeah. At the high level, it's not really about nations. It's about how hard and how well that individual is trained.